This is Alexandra from Alexandra's Creations, and I thought I would do a Reborn with me type of video. So I'm currently working on the Twin B, I believe. So I'm working on blushing at the moment. I've got quite a few layers. But I'm working on the detail, blushing, and creasing, and so I will be using this red mixture here, which I have mixed myself. So I'm just blushing the toes as well as the sole of the foot, and I've already done blue undertones just prior to this, so hopefully you guys can kind of see what I'm doing. So I'm just adding detail and blushing to the feet. I do this in very thin translucent layers, so I can build up a nice blush tone instead of it just being like a bright red that kind of like pops out at you. So you guys can see that's just a very subtle red, like a blush, and I'm going to continue doing this until it gets to just the right consistency that I like. And so I just keep applying very small amounts to the toes, the ball of the foot, the heel, and the very top near the toes. And I work in a footprint pattern, so I don't apply any blushing to the middle of the foot, because in babies that area is usually blue or slightly yellow. So I'm just working around, kind of patting in the color into the creases to give it more depth, and slightly around the edge of the foot to give a little more color as well. And once that's done, I use my cosmetic wedge and I just kind of blend it in and get rid of the extra paint. And I just continue doing that. I also have a pretty bright lamp behind me, so if you just kind of see me moving this back and forth, it's just to assess the color. So it's still pretty light red, not quite where I want it, but that's okay. Reborning takes a while, and it's really worth the time to build up the color rather than trying to get a lot of color all at once, because it will give off a cakey, rushed kind of look to it, which you certainly do not want. So I'm making sure to get the edges of the toes as well, because sometimes the creases will end up white, which doesn't look very good. So you just generally want to make sure that all of the creases and wrinkles and whatnot are covered. I lightly blend, and I'm going to set this foot aside to let the colors dry. And I'm going to work on one of the hands, which actually has extra blushing on it, or mottling, sorry. I'm going to just kind of dab that. You can see that there is some blue undertones here already, just on the palm, the inside of the hand, and on the fingers, and top of the hand as well. And so this kit has pretty flexible, movable fingers, so that's really good for detailing and creasing. I've already done a little bit of a darker color, so to give off more depth. And so now I'm just going to blush using that same red tone as before, grabbing a little bit with my brush and getting the excess off. Like I said, to build up slowly, and I'm just going to apply it to the base, right where the thumb would be, to the tips of the hands as well, and at the base of each finger, and kind of towards the outer edge, like so. And I'm going to blend away the excess, and allow that to absorb and dry. So that looks pretty good. You can see just a little bit of colors there, really. And that's exactly what I want. It's just a little bit of color, not too much. Sorry, just like I said, to build it up slow. I'm going to do the same thing with the top of the hand. I'm going to apply the blushing to the fingers and try to get in between as well. I'm trying to make sure you guys can see. Just kind of lightly going over it, making sure to get the sides and as close to the nail bed or cuticle as possible, and in between as well. So I'm just going to glaze that. Same thing with the thumb, get as close to the nail bed as possible and in between. You want to make sure to really pat down the paint there so that there's no white spots. And then the tips of the fingers as well. On the inside, you don't want those to be white either. And the sides as well. So once that is complete, you will see a little more red tone to the hand. And I'm just going to lightly blend. I don't want to take off too much color because I do like the color and consistency right now. So I'm just going to very lightly blend it in and remove just a little bit of the excess color, but there's not too much to remove. And so what you get is just a very light, very fine red, like a little pink tone. You can kind of see it in between. It also gives more depth as well. And so that's really what you want is you want to achieve that realistic warmth to the skin. I like to compare its skin tone to mine to see kind of how well I'm doing. And so once this dries a little bit, I'm going to apply more blushing to the hands, and then I'm going to do creasing. So I have the other hand over here, just off to the side, which has been drying. And I'm going to do the same thing with this. Now this hand is more kind of clenched, so it's a little bit more difficult to get the paint in where you want it. So for this one, I'm just, again, applying at the base of the thumb, really in the corners, at the top of the fingers, and on the outside of the palm of the hand, so that the middle is reserved for the blue and yellow tones. I'm going to apply again to the top of the fingers, probably a little bit more where the fingers are clenched, just for that added effect. And again, just slightly brushing it onto the extended fingers and on the tips as well. And make sure it gets into the creases of the fingers as well. Then I'm going to just slightly go to the side here, which kind of gives a nice transition from palm to top of the hand, and just a little bit at the base, right where the wrinkling is going to be. And then again, I just lightly blend. And this gives a really nice difference between the palm of the hand and the back of the hand, and the fingertips have a nice coloring to them. Again, not too bright, not too noticeable, but subtle is really what you're going for. This kit also has a lot of wrinkling and creasing on it, especially on the feet and a little bit on the hands. So I'm going to use a smaller brush. This one is a miniature liner, 20/0. And this one's really great for creasing as well. I'm going to grab just a slight amount and wipe off the excess. And I'm going to work in the creases of the hands, just following the wrinkling. And again, this adds depth, it adds warmth. And again, we're going for realism. And you want to give off a nice 3D effect. I'm just following the lines. Hold on. Alright, I apologize. The dog started barking and I had to cut there. It's only been a few minutes, but I'm still doing creasing on this arm here. Just following the natural wrinkling of the kit and really kind of filling in all of the creases with just a small amount of paint. You really need to be delicate. So I get rid of most of the paint on the brush before I even do anything. And again, that's just to build up a subtle look. And again, I don't want it to look rushed or anything. So I'm just barely covering the wrinkling and the creases, so that over time, as I add more layers, it'll look more 3D, more realistic, and it won't look caked on or rushed. Once again, I apologize. My phone ran out of space and I had to clear it. So I'm going to go right where I left off, just creasing the fingers and palm of the hand, getting the indentations, and just following where all the creasing is. So once you have a few layers of that, it'll kind of build up really nicely. And give off a nice texture. I'm going to blend it out, and I'm going to let this one dry and work on another piece while I wait. So this particular kit also has a belly plate, but before I work on that, I would like to work on the other foot, just for creasing, just this little foot here, as well as blushing the foot. So I'm going to get a little bit of that red, have most of it off, and just kind of pat it onto the feet. Again, I'm just following the outer footprint and on the heel of the foot, just like a real baby's foot outline would be. A little bit on the siding as well. So once that's done, I blot away excess and blend it all in nicely. And then it'll give us a nice color. And the foot is also really nice for undertoning, especially blue and yellow. It really adds depth, and it also adds a nice coloration when combined. So because I have so much blushing on the foot, I want to make sure to balance that out with blue undertoning as well. So I have this vein blue color, which I need to add more paint to, because I tend to be pretty clumsy with my paint, which is not a good thing. Going to add just a little bit more thinner to it to freshen it up, just like that, and then close that back up. And what that does is it's going to give me more paint from this already pre-mixed palette. Just going to shake it a little bit so it gets that nice kind of almost transparent, translucent light blue color. And that's really good for, like I said, building up. So I'm going to use a smaller brush, remove the excess paint off of this brush. Just make sure it's clean. I'm going to get just a little bit, wipe off excess, and just apply a very small amount to the middle of the foot, and then blend that away. And so over time, that will build up to a nice kind of blue indent with the blushing around it. Which again, subtlety. So once that's done, then I can continue blushing and creasing. So this particular kit does have some smaller wrinkling on the feet, but it does have a lot larger creasing and wrinkling on the top of the foot. So you want to also make sure that when you blush the top of the feet, that you kind of don't blush the whole thing, because it'll just look really red. Mainly you just want to apply blush to the toes and kind of the base of the toes, and I'm just kind of getting any dust or debris off before doing so. And then I'm going to start doing that. So just applying to each toe, just a little, making sure to get in between as well and the side of the toe. And then for the large one, just on the top and getting into the side creasing and the other side of the toe. And then blushing the base, just really pushing the paint in there. And then just little splotches on top. And so when that is blended, it will look like a nice transition to a cooler tone from the outside, and then more red as you get to the toes because it's further from the head and chest where most of the circulation is. And so it'll give a really nice, you know, warm, newborn effect. And so you can already see that the color is building very nicely, which you want. And you want a nice subtle buildup. And then for the creasing, I'm going to do the same thing, just with a smaller brush, applying to all the wrinkles. Depending on the kit, this could take you a few minutes, or it could take up, you know, half of your painting day. This particular kit does have a lot of wrinkling in the toes and hands, but not too much, so it's pretty doable for me. So we have a nice color buildup starting here, and a nice color buildup on the toes as well. So I'm going to set that off to the side, and we're going to do some creasing on the belly plate. So the belly plate is just this flat one here. I've done just a little bit of blushing on the belly button, but really not much else. So I'm going to just grab a little bit of red, wipe away excess, and this belly plate actually, if you can see it, has a lot of detail on the belly button itself, which is a great place for blushing. So I'm going to apply more blush than usual to the crease here to add depth and to make it more warm, and around the belly button as well. And then throughout the larger creases, just a very light amount. Again, you don't want it to look caked on, you don't want it to look rushed or applied too thick or chalky. That's also a common mistake, is applying it too heavily because the mixture is too thick and it gets like a cakey, really paint looking texture, which will not really look that good on a final product. So you really want to take your time, make sure that you're doing everything neatly and within the lines. Hello again, everyone. It's Alexandra. Sorry that I've had to jump cut so many times. I've moved rooms, so that's why the decoration and the background is different. We have pets in the house, and I don't want them to interfere with the painting or get any pet hairs on my current work. So I'm in my own room to continue this part of the painting process. In between, I've baked all of the limbs, so they're cooling, but a couple are already cooled down enough to start to paint with. Excuse me. It's just the head that has to cool down, as it came out of the oven just within the last few minutes. But before I begin, I want to show you guys this color wheel palette thing. It's really useful for painting. I suggest that you get one. And what it is basically, it's very simple to use. This pointer in the middle, this basically shows complementary colors, and the way that this intertwines with Reborning is, let's say that you were doing like red mottling, but it was too red and you wanted to cool it down. Well, you would use the opposite, which is green, and you would cool down that skin tone, and you can do that with any of, you can do that with any of these colors, like red or red-orange, orange-green, so and so. And then on the back is a really good guide to mixing the colors. So these top ones are the colors that you would be adding to. So let's say you had just regular orange, and then these smaller colors here are the colors that you'd add. So let's say you added blue to orange. This little window would show you what the resulting color would be. So this is more of like a grayish color, like a gray-brown, and you can mix it and play around with it to see what colors would produce what result using these little color wheels. So it's very helpful for painting, especially with mottling. So I just have this off to the side with the current mottling color I'm doing, which is red. So I'm going to scroll that back to the red color, just to kind of guide me. So I'm going to put that back off to the side, and I've kind of just remixed some of the paints so that I have enough to continue. So we're going to start back off on one of the feet. The lighting is also better here, so you can see the tones much better than previously. You can see that there's some red already just very light mottling red tone to it, and a little bit of creasing, and just it's still very pale. I've done I believe 1 or 2 coats of warming wash, and it's still pretty pale. I don't want to do another wash yet until I start doing the veining, and that will be for another part of the video. But I'm going to do the sole of the feet as well. And then after the soles of the feet, I'll do a little bit of the head detailing, and then that will be all of part 1. Since I didn't expect the video to be almost 30 minutes long. So without further ado, I'm going to be using my same red mottling color to do the blushing layers on the feet. And you will notice it gets a little a little repetitive, just because you're doing the same thing over and over with the layers. But that's one of the key features of reborning, is layers. So I'm going to be lightly applying the red color to the toes. And again, this is just to warm it up, look more real. Make sure to get into the creases as well. And then I put it at the top of the foot here, a little off to the side, and I work in the footprint, as I said before, with no blushing in the middle of the foot, just on the heel, the ball of the foot, and right on the outer corners, and then on the toes themselves. And so then I will take one of my sponges. I have a little bin of sponges over here, and I will go ahead and blend that in. And then this adds a lot more color than previously, since it is baked. And it's also important that after baking you let the vinyl cool for a few minutes. Otherwise, if you go directly into painting, since it's so warm, it'll just soak up all the color, and it will not. You won't be able to remove any of your mistakes. So you can see there's a lot more color now that it's baked. After baking, a lot of colors will come up very easily. So that's why you want to bake every couple of layers, so you can really kind of see the progress without, the whole limb being shiny and wet. So we can see that there's more blush here, and this middle is very light and very pale. That's exactly what we want. We don't want the whole thing to be red. So I'm going to move on to blushing the top of the foot in the exact same manner, just applying the blush color to each toe, and making sure to get into the crevices and get as close to the nail bed as possible, and making sure that there's no white spots in between. And then just at the very base of each toe, just put a little splotch to kind of warm it up. Make sure to get all even sides of the toes. Once that's done, I will blend out again. You will notice it's a lot of blending just to get that texture there. And you can see now that it's much more red, but it's not overbearing. It's very light, very subtle. It's a very built up look. It's not like right in your face. It's very nice and muted, but definitely there. just like the foot here, it's still quite pale, but there is a lot of blush to it, and very warm color. A little bit of mottling is showing up on the foot as well. So it's going along very well. So I'm just going to continue applying the blush, making sure to get again into the creases, especially with this kit. You can see there's a little space between here. You want to get down into that space with your brush and apply a little bit to the edge here, because this toe is more prominent, and a little splotch at the base of the toes. Just as close to the nail bed as possible, and then blend out. And then I will also be blending out the sides here. You can see there's a little bit of red, but there's not so much here. And the heel of the foot is where a lot of the coloring will be. So I'm going to add more blush coloring to the heel, and a little bit on the edge there, just to give it that much more realism. And then I'm going to blend it out. And so now you can see it much better there. Just blend until you get a color that you like. And so you can see it's a little more fine now on the edge, which is good. That means that I've been using subtle tones and that it's not building up too quickly. You always want to make sure that before you bake, it's really up to your personal standards, because once you bake, you cannot remove any previous work. Just going to push that paint into the crevices there, and then blend it in. And I usually recommend getting a more like a higher end sponge for blending to take color off. It's really useful because they're pretty absorbent, but they're also less porous, so they're easier to work with. And so now we have a little more detail here, but you will notice that the middle is quite pale in comparison, which we don't want it to be very white and pale. We want a little bit of color there, and that's where the yellow and blue tones will come in. But for now, I'm going to keep blushing the top. You can see that there's a white crease here, which we do not want. So I'm just going to apply blush to the creases and a little bit at the top of each toe, just for emphasis, and at the base so that there's no white line. And don't worry about the toenails yet, because those will be painted at a later point in the process. So those will remain white or neutral or whatever color the kit is. So now we have a nice red, but not too eye-catching. So we're going to also apply blushing to the knees as well, because the knees are also very pigmented. A moment, had to get some water. And so I don't typically use just a regular sponge. I like to use sea sponges, which give it a nice texture instead of just, a red splotch. So I have some sea sponges with me that I will be using for that blush detail. I just have to grab them. And you can get most sea sponges online. You can get them probably at craft stores. pretty much anywhere. So I'm going to grab the sponges and then move on to detailing of the knees and elbows. Alright, so I've got my sponges. You can see I keep them in their original packaging. I have 2 here, but I have 3 in total. And these ones you need to rinse with water very thoroughly first before using them. And that's just to remove any extra particles that you do not want to stick to the paint. So you can see this one is slightly red because I've used this one before, but I want a different texture, so I'm going to use this sponge here. I just kind of move it in my hands a little bit so it's less stiff. And you can see that it provides really nice natural texturing. So I'm going to be using this little side piece here and just applying a small amount of paint. You really don't need much. Just apply a very small amount. And then I'm going to lightly put that onto the knee. Just very lightly pounce it onto the knee. Make sure that it's the consistency that I like. It looks pretty good. So you can see that it's very subtle red instead of just like a big splotch. And that's exactly what you want, is a nice subtle differentiation between the two. I'm going to very lightly pounce to blend. You don't want to blend it away to where the texture goes away, just a little bit to get the extra off. And it produces a beautiful red effect that transitions nicely to the lower part of the leg and foot. And it's not, again, it's not like a bright red. So I'm going to let this one dry while we work on the arms. Because the head is almost cooled just enough, but I want to be sure that it cools down completely. So with this hand, you can see it already, the blushing is already more prominent as well, which is good. Again, just grab a little bit of that red paint and apply it onto the sponge. Rip off the excess, and then I'm going to apply it to the back of the hand, just very lightly pouncing it on. And this is great because it doesn't add mottling, just adds a nice shade. And you can apply a little bit to the fingers. I like to apply it just to the lower portion of the fingers and just right by the wrist. And then you can see that nice texture there. And I'm going to, again, just very lightly pounce it just to grab excess and really blend it in. And that will be a nice, beautiful added texture as well, as you can see there. It's a little shiny since it's wet, but you can see that it doesn't add just like a red area, it adds a very subtle red. And so with the fingers, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the same thing, but just apply it to fingers to add just a little more redness there, and then blend it a bit. And then that will help it be more prominent, as you can see there. And then, of course, apply it to the elbow as well. So I'm going to grab a little more paint, apply it to the sponge, get a little bit of excess off, and apply to the elbow very lightly. Okay, once it's on the elbow there, you can see it produces a very subtle, like a strawberry red to lightly pounced blend. And then there we have it. very light blushing. I can always add more. That's the thing, is you would rather have less color than more, because you can always add, but you can't really take away. So I'm going to, again, blush the back of the hand in the same manner. And then blend. And then you will get something along that line there.